Hi, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this is actually a pretty awesome, amazing new experience for me as the host of this podcast, because on episode 82, we had a woman named Kate Arthur, a long time friend of mine. And at the time, she talked a lot about being a twin sister, and we were so intrigued by that I got in touch with her sister, who is now live on the phone with us, Becky Arthur Dewey. And before we go any further, I just want to mention that I also know Becky, so it wasn't like I've never met her before. So as you listen to this interview, you'll hear two familiar people talking. We both studied together at the University of Pittsburgh, and she just started a new chapter in her professional career, and she's offering bookkeeping, payroll, and administrative support to local businesses. So if you are local to her, hit us up. Anyway, welcome, Becky. How are you?
I am great. How are you doing? It's so good to hear your voice.
Yeah, likewise. It's really good to hear you. And it was funny because I was mentioning in the pre-little ramble interview how much you sound like your sister. But the one thing I was going to note that's very different is like your diction, your word choice. So I always found that fascinating that, family members can sound similar and all that. But before we get into all the twin stuff, because I'm going to bore you with annoying questions you've probably answered a million times, where exactly are you living now, and how old are you? And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
I am living in Oregon City, Oregon, relocated here from Portland 2 years ago and spent 10 years in Portland. And prior to that, kind of bounced around a little bit after college. I am 39 years old, technically considered a millennial. And I'm hoping that I can make the name millennial proud, because I think sometimes millennials get a bad rap, and I'm pretty cuspy millennial, so borderline millennial, but I'm not really sure I really fit into any category when it comes to the generation.
Yeah, I will say it's been like 10 years since we actually hung out in person, but I would definitely not describe you as a typical millennial. So maybe it has to do with age and all that. And actually, I'm pretty similar to you. I just think you're more of a like old school kind of personality. So I wouldn't put you in any generation.
Yeah, I think we're in the age group where we don't want to be in a generational group or labeled in any way, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's important it's like a weird identity complex for a lot of us. And I was reading a book recently on how it's really the fault of the digital era. Like we just saw something that will never come back, but we actually like navigated it and used it enough that we're like tenuous. I don't know if that's the right word, but like, we're a little bit like careful about this new world, like social media and all that kind of stuff. So some of us at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are you a fan of social media? Like in general, what are your thoughts on that?
I am not. I'm not a huge fan of social media or mainstream media. I quite honestly think that it has led to the speeding up of our society, and I am always and will always be an advocate for slowing things down and really just taking time to, this is pretty cliche, but stop and smell the roses. And I think, yeah, social media really makes things move so much faster, and I don't know, it takes away from our human connections. And so I'm not a big user of social media platforms. I don't have Twitter. I use Facebook, but I mostly use Facebook to learn about bird species because I belong to several Pacific Northwest birding groups, and I've always been in love with birds, but I've more recently kind of started learning more through these birding groups. And it also just makes my news feed so much more fun to look at because it's not all about politics. Or I also do want to say social media is amazing for the simple fact that you get to see people that you don't get to see in person. So, seeing their lives and their children grow up. And that is one aspect of social media that I'm 100% on board with.
I'm right there with you. I think that's a really good way to describe it. And my son just turned 7, and my daughter's not even like 2 yet. So I'm actually curious because you have a 9-year-old. How afraid of her reality on like social media and all this stuff are you, or are you just like chill? Like, where do you stand on all that?
I am not afraid. I think that it's really important as parents to communicate very openly with our children. I think that it's a thing of the past to try to shelter them from the realities of life. And I am hoping that I can just maintain. I have an awesome relationship with my daughter who's 9. Her name's June. And we have an awesome open relationship when it comes to communication. I'm very honest with her, and I've talked to a lot of friends of mine, parents and non-parents, and I've just kind of gotten a lot of different opinions about this topic. Her father is extremely worried about social media and mainstream media, and just he's a little bit more aligned with conservative views, and and he is a little more fearful of the impacts that those kinds of things can have. And I do believe that some of that fear is logical and rational, but at the same time, I am not fearful. And I think that the key is communicating with our children and just making them aware of what the dangers could potentially be.
That's awesome. And yeah, like I said, I'm like not there yet, so I'm not even thinking about it, but it's comforting to hear your take on it, because that is like what I would like to take. And that's kind of a good segue into like my first question about like the family dynamics for you. And again, I mean, this show's really just about your perspective on death. So I am going to ask you right away after this question what you think happens when you die, just to give you like an extra 10 seconds to think about it. But real quick, your sister and I both self-identify as hippies, which is like either common or uncommon depending on where you live in this country. I'm just curious, do you also identify as one, or is that just for her, or what's your thought on that?
I do not identify as a hippie. There are totally people who would identify me as a hippie.
That's hilarious.
It's all a spectrum in everything, in my opinion. Everything is a spectrum when it comes to empathy, when it comes to style and personality. We all fall somewhere on a spectrum, and even whether it's a political spectrum or a societal spectrum. I don't consider myself a hippie, but I love to do lots of things that maybe classical hippies do, like dig in the dirt and go birding and be outside in nature. So I think that, yeah, I probably could be described as a hippie, but it really just depends on who you ask.
You mentioned that you're into birding, and that's something that I've like vaguely heard of, but I've never actually done or read a book about or even known anyone who does it. Can you briefly describe what is birding? How did you get into it? And if someone listening, it kind of like piques their interest or something, what would you recommend to them?
So I have always been into birds. I think I like to look up at the sky and down at the ground a lot. So I grew up just in the woods in Pennsylvania. And so I've always really been into birds, but I really started getting into them more when I got my first really nice pair of binoculars. So if anyone's interested in getting into birding, which is essentially watching birds, you can learn to identify them by the way they look or the way they sound. Some people might argue that if you can't identify them by the way they sound, then you're not really a true birder, which I disagree with. I like to identify them by the way they look. I'm just fascinated by the number of species. In Oregon, we have an amazing place called Sauvie Island, and it has migratory birds, mostly waterfowl, ducks and cranes and things like that. And so that's what I do in the winter is I take my binoculars and I go out to Sauvie Island and look at birds, and it's just so peaceful and beautiful, and I love it. So it's a way to be outside and connect with nature, and that's really what it's all about in my world.
Yeah. And that's why I thought it would be kind of an interesting segue. And then right away, I do just want to know, like, what is your actual thought process on what's going to happen to you specifically when you die? Like your sense of consciousness, your sense of self, and your body and all that.
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
Yeah, so this is really one of the reasons I was so intrigued to come on this podcast, because my twin sister Kate and I have extremely differing views on most everything. We are so much alike, but we are also so different. And one of the things we view very differently is death and grief. And we've, as anybody who listened to the podcast with Kate would know, that we have experienced recently in the last, in 2021, our father passed away, and he had taken his own life. And that experience really brought forth the difference between what I believe and what all my sisters, because we have we have 4 other sisters, and so there's 6 of us all together, and so each one of us had to experience this massive loss differently, and it just really brought to the foreground each of our different perspectives. And it was something that I had seen coming for my entire life. And so I did not know when it was going to happen, but I just, I knew that someday my dad would be gone, and I would have to face this. And it just so happened that I really didn't have a great relationship with him. So when he actually did pass, it was almost like it was a different grieving process, because I had been grieving a sort of death of him for my entire life. And so that was where I feel like it really was different, because Kate had just started a relationship with him, or a different relationship with him, just prior to him taking his life. Each one of our experiences was different, and it really it made us all want to talk about it a lot. And so I've been thinking about it a lot. And it also is crazy because I never could talk about death at all when I was a kid. I was so scared of it. And I was so scared of talking about my mom or anybody that I loved. I'm not scared of it anymore. I don't fear it. I've read a lot about the life cycle. And my belief is that everything is energy based. And when I die, my body will go into the ground. And I've made it specifically clear that I do not want anyone to keep any parts of my body. I don't want any of my ashes kept or retained. I want them all to go back into the ground or the river. And then my energy, which is not something that's only mine, it's part of the collective energy.
Wow, that's cool.
It is. It's something that it's not mine. It came from something way before me, way bigger and way more just kind of incomprehensible. It's really, I think it's a concept that is, I don't understand it in the least. But I find that to be comforting, just knowing that it was something else before me, and it will become something else after me. And so it really gives me an understanding of the ability to live in the present, and also understand that every single action and word and breath that I take in this like realm of existence, it will have an impact, whether it's great or small, and so it gives me an idea that I should really be like more conscious of everything I do, because it is not going to end with me.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That was one of my favorite answers I've ever heard to that question. I'm so intrigued by all that because, it's extremely philosophical. It's very thoughtful. It's absolutely both unscientific and yet scientific sounding to me, and I'm saying that with praise. But I think the part that really appeals to me is that it's like such a challenge for me to defy the notion that every little thing I do matters. Like every time I want to pretend that it doesn't because it's convenient, I know it does. Like returning shopping carts where they go, putting something back on the right shelf, not telling someone what you think sometimes, you know, like, yeah, it's a really profound answer. And I'm curious. Look, I mean, you've always been very mature to me, like even 10, 15 years ago when we were hanging out. Is this like a newish philosophy of yours, or have you kind of been carrying this for a long time?
It's been, I would say, I think I've experienced more death, tragic death, and expected, and kind of expected death with elderly people. And I've just had to support a lot of people through the grieving process, and it gives me comfort. And this is why I find it so interesting, because it is, I would say, fairly new to me to have peace around the idea of it, because I know it's going to happen. I don't know when, but I think that if we have this understanding that it's not the end, it's the beginning of something, it makes it just more easily discussed, and it makes it kind of it gives us a reason to just really focus on life, on living our lives to the fullest. And that's cliche too, but I think that it really just came up mostly because I've had to come to terms with it. My mom's getting older, and I've lost people, young people too. And so I want my daughter to not fear death. I don't want her to go through life fearing death. And I want her to understand that, when I do go on to the next, whatever it is, nobody knows. But when I do, I don't want her to be consumed by grief. I just want her to really value everything that we had.
Yeah, it's such a weird challenge, because I feel like I'm tap dancing with my parents about this all the time, and I'm saying this because I know they both listen to this pretty commonly. It's a credit to them. They're trying to do what you're doing, and it's like awkward sometimes, especially in my 20s. It was more awkward. Like they would bring up their will, and I'd be like, why are you telling me this? And they're like, because we care about you, and we're trying to like set something up for you that might help you someday. And I'd be like, don't talk about dying, and so it's cool. It's cool to hear you talking about it. You said you knew you'd always lose your dad, but I have a feeling, but I wanted to double check. You meant like before your mom, right? Like that his like longevity was in question to you, or did you just mean someday you were going to lose him because that's the natural order?
I always had a fear that my dad was going to take his own life, is what I meant by that.
Okay. Yeah.
My dad had struggled with mental health issues. I personally believe everybody does. There's the spectrum again. Everybody has a spectrum of things we can handle. And I think it has a lot to do with generational trauma. I know that my dad, and this is kind of also going back to just the past, the energy that we are made of, it affects us still. Everything that happened to whatever the energy was that our bodies, our souls consist of, it affects us still. And that's what I do believe, like there's such things, as generational trauma and just generational effects, consequences of energetic items. But my dad suffered all of my life. And prior to maybe when I was 7, he was more emotionally present. But then once I just basically kind of outgrew his maturity level, in my opinion. And he struggled so much. And he was very much a little boy in a man's body emotionally. And so I just knew he struggled, and I didn't take the time, when I was in high school, to spend nurturing him, which obviously as a child, that's not our jobs to nurture our parents emotionally, but he needed more than than he had, and he just struggled. And so I kind of knew always that he was going to. I was always fearful in college when one of my sisters would call, and I thought they were going to tell me that my dad had taken his life. And so when it actually happened, Kate and I had just talked to him a couple of days prior, and he, it was actually really incredible because he apologized to me for the first time in my life. It was a heated exchange at first, because he at first started to blame Kate and I for not taking more time to really connect with him when we were younger. And I kind of yelled at him and said, we were kids, and we, you can't expect that from a child. And he said, you know what? I'm sorry, hun. And that was like his last words basically to me. And so it really actually made it so that I could be at peace. And so it was really weird because I had no idea that he was going to, take his own life. But I found this like peace in it because I know he's at peace now. And he was never at peace in all the time that I have ever knew him here. And so that made it not easy, because it was not easy at all. And then there was, the talking to my daughter about what had happened. And I struggled on how to tell my daughter that, her grandfather, whom she had only met once or twice, had actually done what he did. And so I got a lot of advice from people in my family and friend group on how to tell June, or if I should tell June the truth. And I decided to tell her the truth, that he had taken his own life. And that was really intense, that decision to tell her.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that go, if you can kind of generalize it,
It actually was, I took a solid week to really, and it kept me up at night trying to figure out how to tell her and talk about it. I have a family member who's a psychiatrist, and I consulted with her, who's she's an amazing woman, and I value her opinion so much. And she's on the same school of thought where she's more wanting to be really honest and communicative with her kids. And so I'm on that same, there was no way around it for me. I couldn't lie. I couldn't tell her, or at least even, I couldn't even skate around the truth. I just really wanted to be honest with her and open that dialogue. And so I did tell her, I just sat her down and I told her that he had taken his own life. And she said, Mom, so now Grandpop is with Garcia. And so Garcia is a horse that my mom and my stepfather had lost just prior to my dad. And so she instantly had this, oh, well, so now Grandpop's with Garcia. So she kind of understands, some concept of an afterlife. And she also suggested, the first thing she said after that was she suggested setting up a memory table for him. And so that day we set up a memory table with a plant. He was a big gardener. So we set up with a plant and a picture of him and a candle, kind of like, in Dia de los Muertos, kind of an ofrenda, like. And I just think it was really emotional for me, because my daughter is 9 years old, but she is extremely emotionally aware. And I would like to believe and hope that she is, always continues to just be aware of her emotions and be able to talk about them.
So incredible. I cannot thank you enough for such a great interview and such a great answer to my question that I was hoping you would give such a good answer to, and you totally did. You knocked it out of the park. I mean, that's incredible, and that's really, really important, I think, for anyone listening who's a parent or a potential parent. Because I do, one of my best friends always tells me, like, don't ever lie to your children and just always be honest with them. And her 3 kids are, like, amazing, just amazing 20-somethings, all 3 of them. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'm doing your strategy. And so I think that's exactly out of her playbook. And we're running out of time, so I feel bad because I did bill this as like a episode where we're going to talk about twin dynamics. So I'm just going to kind of throw out as my last question, and it's not a lazy question, but I figure it'll just work out well. To whatever extent you feel like it, I'd just like you to answer the overall question. Do you think there's something magical to having an identical twin, or do you think it's just like any other sibling who gives a crap, move on? And then obviously, you know, not just a yes or no question.
I absolutely think it is magical. I think it is. So I'll make this as kind of brief as possible. But it touches on kind of a larger philosophical thought that I have had. It's just that we all exist on this, plane of existence. We're here now. We came in when we came in, whether it was by natural vaginal birth or cesarean. We came in when we came in, and before that we were floating in kind of we were floating as an attachment to our mother's bodies, and then we came in and we start with very little personal choice because we're infants and aren't capable of making personal choices, but we go through life and we have more opportunity to make personal choices and direct our atomic beings around. And so the fact that Kate and I came in within 10 minutes of each other, my mom doesn't actually know whether we're identical or not. We look and sound very similar, but we just don't know for a fact. We've never had our DNA tested. I'm like, Mom, was there one sack or 2? But she doesn't remember. She had a lot of kids, so we were her 4th and 5th children. So, but the fact that we came in together, really close. I mean, it's almost, there's twins that are 2 minutes apart or whatever, but we came into this plane of existence, and we are so close. We fight like the Dickens. We disagree. We're really essentially like yin and yang.
Yeah.
But we also, there's so many things about me that are the same as her, and vice versa. We just, the things that we hate about ourselves might be like what the other twin loves about themselves, So it's just like, I think that it is extremely magical. But then again, I think that any birth is magical, and humans are magical, and we're all in this together, in this giant swirling, and faster it's swirling, thanks to social media and all the things. So I would just say, we're all in this together, and if we all can consider the impact that we have, we're looking at a better future. It's just something that I've really recently started kind of putting out there, is just my concept of God, which is that we are all God. And if we all consider ourselves God and godlike, then we'll all be inclined to take care of each other.
Wow, that's really cool, and that was a great answer. And it's been a great interview, and I'm so thankful for you to coming on. I really identified with your vision of how death might work, but not even if like how it works. I just love your concept of energy and the fact that it's bigger and beyond us, and I'm just going to really meditate on that for the next couple days probably, if not longer. So Becky Arthur Dewey, thank you so much for coming on our podcast and helping us put another nail in the coffin. To everyone listening at home, we love you and we love your support. If you want to go the extra mile, please go to mikeyop.com, hit the big old subscribe button, and if you want to go the extra mile, we have a premium package for people which comes with extra goodies, and even if you don't care about those, it really helps to support us to keep this going. So thank you to everyone who listens, and thank you again to Becky. And my name is Mike Oppenheim. This has been another episode of Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.